I can't say I'm really an expert in Polish history, but I did say the Holiday Express last night. The thing about Mickiewicz is an interesting figure in Polish history. In many ways, he's probably the most inspirational. And certainly in modern history, there's no figure like Mickiewicz. But to understand Mickiewicz properly, you have to understand his milieu. Adam Mickiewicz was born in what's called Zalesha, which is near Novogrodek, which is now Novohrudok in Belarus. The country that he lived in at the time, because he lived in actually Imperial Russia, he was born 3 short years after the final partition. But he lived in what is the heartland of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In many ways, the area surrounding his home of Novogrodek is one of the oldest areas of culture in Poland, in what was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, or the Rzeczpospolita, which is a republic. And you have to understand that to understand Mickiewicz. His family was of minor noble origin. They were szlachta. They were not on the level of the magnates, like the Potocki's family, Jagiello, or those types, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with. But nonetheless, he lived a relatively comfortable life, living in the city in a house that was large for the time, although many of us have bigger houses now. But certainly back in the early 1800s, he lived a comfortable life. His father was a lawyer, Michał. His mother is rumored to be of Lithuanian ancestry and or a Tartar ancestry or a converted Jew who was part of the Frankist movement. I don't get too much into the history because you can look a lot of this stuff up yourself. But the society he was born into was in ferment. And when he came of age, he was educated in Vilno or Vilnius in Lithuania today at the university. It was a time of revolutionary ardor and fervor. He was a part of a group of students that formed a society called the Polymath Society, which was later banned by the Russian government, the imperial government. He was later arrested. He spent 5 years in internal exile in Russia before he left, never to come back to Poland actually. He spent most of his adult life in France or Italy, and he died in Istanbul or Constantinople doing his thing, which was sort of a mixture of literature and revolution. He was his contemporaries were people like Byron, Goethe. He met in Germany, in Weimar, after he left, after he had permission to leave Russia. He was familiar with the famous Ukrainian poet Anna Leshna Ukrainka, who was a contemporary of his and believed in a lot of the things that he believed in. I mean, Mickiewicz is interesting also because of his liberalness. He was of noble origin, yet he believed that the institution of serfdom should be abolished. He was for many of the same things that Kosciuszko, who predated him most of their lives were not, they were crossed, but they never really worked together. But the same sort of feeling of the ending of the feudalism, which was really a big problem in Russia and in former Poland at the time, he was for. So a lot of people, his inspiration meant many things. Now he ended up writing some of the most important works of modern Polish literature. In 1828, he wrote a poem called Konrad Wallenrad, and ostensibly it was to it was a work that was described activities during of Polish heroes against the Teutonic Knights, which were a German group of they were sort of warrior knights that it's an old feudal thing, but they were based in what's not like Königsberger, which was a city in East Prussia, and they dominated the trade of the Baltic cities, and it was a great problem for Poland, or what was the Grand Duchy of Poland and other states, because they were very heavy-handed. And so he used the idea of the struggle against the Teutonic Knights as a metaphor for the struggle against Russian domination. So that was a very important theme, and for some reason he was able to get that through the censors, because the censorship in Russia and then the Soviet Union was very common. There was really no difference. The czars had very little interest in allowing any kind of public expression, and that was part of the problem. That's what led to his eventual exile. And then he wrote this his most famous work, which many of us have read or know about, is upon Tadeusz, which is his longest poem, and essentially this really sets him in his milieu of romantic nationalism, because certainly he was, if anything, you could call him romantic, and the rest of his life sort of followed that. He was a believer in great ideas and great thoughts, and that's really what drove him. Certainly, we'd call him a dreamer today. In fact, many of us probably wouldn't want to talk to him. But back then, because of the media, they weren't twittering all the time, and he wasn't on Facebook. But he believed his mission was to provide was sort of a, well, I guess the theme is Prometheanism, and the idea with Mickiewicz and other people, which became it's a large part of the Slavic character. His was this romantic idealism, this sort of almost, and he veered from Prometheanism, which was sort of based on the myth of Prometheus, which was a opening to other, like he believed that those who had the ability and the knowledge should open help open the eyes of the people who didn't, like the poor people, the underclass, etc. So it put him in that great European ferment of the revolutions. But the other, which I mentioned before, but not to belabor the point, but you have to understand Mickiewicz in that milieu, and you have to understand the country he lived in was a multi-ethnic country. Poland hadn't been, after the division, wasn't ethnically cleansed like it was after World War II. And the area in which he lived in was a mixture of what people would say are Poles or Belarusians, Lithuanians, which is interesting because he considered himself a Lithuanian. And he's a hero in Lithuania, Belarus, and Poland, and I guess Ukraine as well. But what he meant by Lithuanian was someone from the area of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, not the Baltic people called what we call Lithuanians today. So, although he is known in Lithuania as Adam Mickiewicz, and revered as much as by the Poles. But anyway, to get back to that was sort of an aside, because you have to understand him and the way he viewed the world, and everything for him was this a belief that we can restore the Commonwealth to independence and all the people within it. That would even include Jews, because that was a bit of an issue at the time. Would all share equally. And so Mickiewicz, when he wrote Pan Tadeusz, he wrote it was a picture of the time before the Napoleonic invasion of Russia, in which he was trying to give, he was sort of an elegy in a sense, or a funeral dirge to the nationalism that had been vanquished before and yet may come again. And so that's where that's really what made him the Polish figure of such renown. He continued to write other works, such as Jada, which is the Forefathers' Eve, which is it's based on an ancestor worship that was common in this area, and actually it's still celebrated today in Belarus as part of the official fall customs, because they're throwback to the communist years. But that being said, his vision, though, as I said, drove him from Poland, and he ended up living in France for a while. And when he was in France, he continued his romantic revolutionary vision, which led him to be banned and fired from his university posts. And then he ended up in Rome finally. And at this time in his life, which would be probably in his early 50s, he had wore himself down, and but he was still fighting the good fight. And at that point, he had become what they call a messianist. There was a school of philosophers, especially in the Slavic mythology, I guess at the time, a religious mystic belief in the martyrdom of the Slavic people. The Russians, it's part of the ideology of, sort of this, it's like the underpinning of the Russian regime. The Soviets, Soviet man was the long-suffering Slav, and they tolerated as much abuse because they knew that their future would be better. And Mickiewicz got into this towards the end, which sort of skewed his attempts to bring forth greater revolution, because he still promoted the idea of ending serfdom and providing for more economic opportunity for the unfortunate and the serfs, former serfs. They were still serfs in 1850s when he was active. But he tried then to raise an army called the Polish Legions after the 1830s revolutions that swept through the former Commonwealth. There was many Polish patriots that lived in Italy, and then he tried to do a Polish Legion that eventually failed. And at his final act, he was in Constantinople, and he was organizing a Jewish legion at the time. And he died of what they believed to be cholera, and he was buried in Istanbul. Then his remains were transferred to France, and then finally to Wawel in Krakow, the famed cathedral. But sort of wrap it all up, it's hard to give a full understanding of Mickiewicz in just a few minutes, and I hope I've done an adequate job, but you really need to understand the enormousness of the subject and the complexity of the man. But within that, he became essentially the person most influential in Polish aspirations for freedom at that time. And he also was considered to be one of the greatest epic poets of his day, and especially because he tried to bring his subject matter into that with the common folk. And he wasn't, such as Byron, he wasn't a dandy. He believed truly in the affairs of the people. So in that case, and I guess ending with that, I guess that's why, you know, our spirit of Mickiewicz has lasted since 1895, because we tried to be, you know, not an elite club, but one in the spirit of Adam Mickiewicz with the people.